My first steps in Africa was in Ethiopia.
I'm in Ethiopia, y'all.
And that was just a trippy feeling because my family has not been back to the continent of Africa since the transatlantic slave trade. So to just step on the ground and just feel the environment and the energy it was a very spiritual experience for me. And to be honest, when I stepped off that plane in Ethiopia, it smelled like barbecue, seasoning, and food. And it warmed my heart because I have a lot of Ethiopian friends here in the United States, so I'm not a stranger to having coffee at the Ethiopian coffee shops or going to the restaurants and having dinner. So I was just like, oh, like this is so cute. Now this video is to speak on my experience with Ethiopian Airlines. It was my first time traveling out of the USA. And it's just crazy because my first time ever leaving the USA, I was going to Africa. Now I done already told y'all, Africa is not for beginners, but I'm a risk taker, so I did it anyways. Plus, I did a lot of research prior, and I knew that the countries that I was going to, I at least had some experience with the diaspora that's already in the USA. So like, I already had exposure to Ethiopian culture, very immersed in it. What I have on right now is actually a Somali bati, and I see it in Somalia a lot. I see it in Kenya sometimes. I also see it in the eastern region of Ethiopia being worn by the Somali people who live there. And I also see this fabric right here in the island of Comoros, which is close to Madagascar in the Indian Ocean. Now, when I say I landed in Ethiopia, and it was trippy because my family haven't been back to Africa in like 400 years, so, you know, now I'm seeing where my ancestors were. To clarify that, I know that my ancestry is spread across multiple countries in West Africa, and I have ancestry from Madagascar. So I know people come in the comments like, Ethiopia was never colonized, your ancestors not from that. I know that. So let's get started with my experience with Ethiopian Airlines. I flew out of Washington, D.C. in May 2022. Let's start with checking my bags. So actually it was very packed that day, and I stood in a very long line waiting to check my bags. When I finally got to the counter, it was a nice young lady who helped me out, and we had a short conversation because, you know, I was so excited to go to Ethiopia, and I wanted to know if she was from Ethiopia, because I was about to start asking questions, but she actually ended up being Sudanese, and I'm knowledgeable about Sudanese culture too. They're very warm, sweet, loving people. We had a short conversation about it, and she actually came from behind the counter and gave me a hug like, you my sister, I love you, have a safe trip. And I just thought that was just such a beautiful entry to me going to Africa for the first time, to just have somebody do that. Because, you know, in the US, the culture is not very warm. So to finally be going to Africa and feel what that warmth is supposed to feel like, it was just amazing. But she checked my bags, everything was good. Now I do want to note, I do have a couple people that have told me that they've had issues with things being stolen out of their bags with Ethiopian Airlines, and that's not to put the airlines down, because to be honest, this video is actually a very good experience with them. But if anybody is watching this, I do kind of want to let them know, just be careful, or make sure your stuff is secure, or maybe bring it in on your in-flight bag or something like that if you have something very valuable. But I'm not saying that happens often. And this can happen with any airlines. People get stuff stolen from any airline in America or any first world country. But you know, I'm authentic, so I do have to let y'all know. And if anybody from Ethiopia Airlines see that, just, you know, take care of it. That's it, that's all. The next thing I want to talk about is going to my gate within DC Airport and waiting on my flight. Don't remember much, to be honest, but when I did go to my gate and sit down, I do remember it was a lot of families. It was a lot of Ethiopian families, a lot of couples with children going back home to the continent. So I thought that was very beautiful, just to see how many families were able to return home. It is not cheap to go to Africa at all. So if you think about a family of 5, that's over $5,000 in tickets. Cause, whoo. But you know, I'm happy for them that, you know, they taking their children back to Africa at an early age, cause it took me till I was like 28 to go back to Africa. It took me till I was 28 to leave the USA. I'm 30 now. So if you get to leave the country as a child and travel around, you are very lucky. The boarding process, I don't believe it took that long. It was pretty smooth. When we talk about my first impression, sitting down in my seat and boarding and listening to the announcements and seeing the flight attendants were beautiful African Ethiopian ladies. You know, Amharic was being spoken on the plane as well as English. When I looked at my screen in front of me, it was Amharic and English, and that's
በረራዎች ላይ ሲጋራ ማጨስ በጥብቅ የተከለከለ መሆኑን እያስታወቅን በመጸዳጃ ቤት ውስጥ ያሉትን የጭስ መቆጣጠሪያ መሳሪያዎች መነካካት ፈጽሞ
when I was like, it's getting real. I'm really finna go to Africa. They speaking Amharic. And you know, I only know a little Amharic. I'm a Seganalo, Denanish. I'm just throwing out random stuff. But that was so cute, the Amharic on the plane. I sat in the middle seat during a 13-hour flight. I had to pause for a minute because it's doable. I'm not gonna lie, it's not preferred, but it's doable. The seats were comfortable. They had Wi-Fi on the plane going there, so I managed. If I needed to go to the bathroom, I was able to get up and go. That plane was actually very big, so they had 3 rows of seats on the left, 3 rows of seats in the middle, and 3 rows of seats on the right side. So it was a huge plane. Aside from a lot of Ethiopian people returning home, I also noticed that there were a lot of white people going to Africa. I don't know if they was going specifically to Ethiopia or if it was just a layover for them. But I did want to mention the demographics of the people that I seen on the plane because it's just part of the experience. The flight attendants were nice and they were business casual. Let's talk about the food. I don't think I ever went hungry on that airplane because it seemed like every 2 hours they was feeding us. They was up and down the rows giving us food to eat. What I remember eating is like, I don't know what it's called, but I'm just gonna call it curry chicken and rice. And you had the option to choose beef or fish as well. That curry and chicken and rice was the best airplane food that I had, so I didn't have no complaints because I eat that at home several times a week. Also, let's talk about the beverages. So they have the standard soda, juice, water beverages, but the soda is different. The soda is Ethiopian soda, and Coca-Cola is my favorite soda, but in every country it tastes different depending on the sugar regulations. Ethiopian soda tastes exactly like Coke Zero. Nigerian Coca-Cola tastes like Diet Coke. I'm not tweaking because my Ethiopian friends out here usually order Diet Coke when they go out because I think that tastes more similar to the one back in Ethiopia, and they're not used to all that sugar, which I wish the US would do something about the amount of sugar that we use too, because it's not healthy. So the food overall on that flight was good. I give it a thumbs up. The next thing is the sights that I seen while I was in the airplane. I remember flying over Sicily, and it was nighttime. It was beautiful. It was lit up. I'm like, I need to go there one day. I remember flying over Sudan, and I'm just looking like I'm really flying over Africa. Sudan had like an arid look. The next experience is landing. We landed in the daytime, and when we landed, the capital of Ethiopia looked very city-like. Honestly, the buildings reminded me of like the huge apartments when you're flying over the Bronx. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm just speaking in a structural, I can't pronounce it, a structural term. Like they were very tall, reddish buildings. The land looked arid. So when you think about a color scheme, I would think like reds, browns, greens. That was my color scheme for Ethiopia. When you get closer, flying into the capital, it actually reminds me of like Washington, D.C. because they have tall buildings, a lot of new developments, and it's a lot of bright lights, and it's very busy. When we landed, everybody on the plane clapped, including me, because this is my first time in Africa. I'm here, I made it. It was a 13-hour flight and we made it. Now, let's talk about my thoughts about the airport and my layover. The airport had a lot of American and European companies in there. So you know how you go to the airport, you could go in like a perfume store and buy Gucci, Louis, Chanel, whatever. They got all that in Ethiopia. They got restaurants, they got shops in there where you could buy cultural jewelry, cultural clothes, things to that nature. I found the airport clean, and it smelled like cleaning solution. Like the employees were always cleaning it up. So I didn't have any issues with sanitation or health in terms of the airport. When I went to my gate to sit down for, I think what was an hour-long layover, nobody bothered me. It was a very peaceful experience. I just sat down and waited. Next is when I finally boarded my second flight to go to Nigeria. It was a cultural shift. So instead of the flight being filled with mostly Ethiopian people, of course, now we're switching to Nigerian culture. So, you know, I thought that was really cute just to see the different cultures, everybody going home to their home country. Africa is so diverse, so it's just so much to learn, so many different types of people to see. And it just always intrigues me. I always have questions for people about how they grew up, their home languages, the food they ate. I love it. The flight to Nigeria, I believe, was 5 hours. I remember on that flight, it was a lot of people from the Nigerian military on it. Again, it was a peaceful flight. I was unbothered. They kept feeding us. And when we landed and I got to Nigeria, It was a different scenery, a different experience, which I explained in my other videos if you want to check them out. The next video that we're going to talk about is part 2, when I was coming back to America and I had to go through Ethiopia again. We're going to talk about the overnight at the hotel and my experience going through security in the capital of Ethiopia.